Having been in the flying business for 78 years, I had a lot of unusual trips. One of them was I sold an airplane to the British government down in the Caribbean, and to be based on the island of Montserrat, which is in the Leeward Islands. And the Leeward Islands are about 800 miles out into the ocean, Atlantic Ocean, from the bulge in Venezuela. And Montserrat was a beautiful volcanic island. In fact, the Beatles even had a recording studio there. It was kind of a real hideaway for a lot of the rock and roll people. And it was a beautiful island. And there was no airport there, so the British government bought this airplane. And then they signed the contract to go there and start the little airline, and they're going to build an airfield on that could handle the airplane. Well, they sent a pilot up for training, and he was supposed to take the airplane back, but the guy just couldn't cut it. He spent most of his time in the bar room and wouldn't let him. We couldn't train him. So I wouldn't let him take the airplane, obviously, because he'd never make it. So I had to take the airplane. It was a long trip. And the island of Montserrat was something like 1,500 miles south of Miami. So appointed day, he shows up, we load the airplane. I sold some other equipment to him. So we started out, and we're going out of Naples, because I had the airplane at Naples, Florida. We're gassed up, start out, and I determined I was going to fly instruments because the weather was bad. But the airway went right down about 5 miles east of the Bahama Islands. Well, we were in the clouds for maybe 3 hours or so. We broke out, and the Bahama Islands should have been off here to my right. I looked, no Bahama Islands. I looked at the compass was just going crazy. And we were now out over the Atlantic Ocean for about 3 hours. And I thought, oh my, we're in the Bermuda Triangle. They called it down in the Caribbean the Devil's Triangle. In fact, the Beacon Journal had a story about it. And we'd been flying for about 3 hours, and everything quit. All my electric, the airplane quit. The compass was spinning around. The radios went out because I couldn't hear from oceanic airways, and I was on an instrument flight plan to them. And so the only thing I could do I figured out that I could just make a right turn and head back to where the Bahama Islands were. And sure enough, the Bahama Islands came up in sight, and I followed them down to St. George Island, which was our first stop for refueling. Then was going to go on to Puerto Rico, then to Antigua, then to Montserrat. But I'd been flying now for about 4 hours. I had something about 5 hours of flying, of fuel left, or 1 hour of fuel left. And I thought, oh my, I start sweating then, because you don't want to be out in the open ocean, not knowing where you are, and with about 1 hour's flying time left for your airplane. Well, finally, I started getting some radio signals back, and Eastern Airlines, way above me at 30,000 feet, pilot says, what happened? He said, I came through here yesterday and I lost all my instruments. All electrical in my airplane went out. Another Eastern Airlines pilot came out, he was at 20,000 feet. He says, same thing happened to me, and it happened to me again today. What's going on? They asked the approach controller, do you have these cosmic explosions off the sun? Which they all come back, and when they hit the world, they intercept all radio communications. They cut electrical off and off. They're strong enough. Well, we were in there. We all got hit by it, so nobody could give an explanation. Then one pilot says, okay, it's probably the Russians messing up our radios. So I landed at St. George Island, and we ran out of gas on the runway. Couldn't even be taxiing in to gas up. They had to tow us in. And then I started thinking about it, And when I got back to the United States, I was talking to people about it and asking one guy, in fact, both were Navy men, and one guy said that he was on a destroyer and he was in charge of all the electronics on the destroyer. They were in the same area, that same triangle, the Bermuda Triangle, that the ship lost everything. In fact, the ship stopped. They couldn't even run the engines. And he said they finally got emergency signals out. They got towed into shore, and it took them a month to recalibrate all the electronics on that destroyer. Then another man, in fact, it was unusual, I had him on a charter flight. He came up to the cabin and he sat and talked to me. We talked about the Bermuda Triangle. And he said that, yes, there is something there. It's not aliens, which a lot of people think, that aliens are shutting these airplanes and ships down because they've lost a lot of ships, a lot of airplanes. And years ago, there were 5 torpedo bombers out of Miami on a training mission. They all got lost, and nobody has ever heard anything from them again. This has happened in 1945, 5 airplanes. And numerous airplanes have disappeared in the Bermuda Triangle. And there's a lot of talk about aliens and shutting everything off, but the explanation, the informal explanation in the Navy was that probably a asteroid hit in the United States into the ocean, and a huge one, because they do claim that an asteroid wiped prehistoric Earth life off of the Earth. They say it happened one time, just one, and it was all gone. And this meteorite was buried somewhere between Japan and the United States, out in the Pacific Ocean. And they said that at times, it will erupt and send up tremendous magnetic signals. And that destroys everything in the airplane, anything electrical in the airplane, and the ships. Then that area is also known for tremendous thunderstorms that show up just like hurricanes. And then the ship is lost, it can't do anything, and then people never hear from the airplane or the ships again. In fact, when those 5 military airplanes were lost, they sent 2 airplanes out, 2 big airplanes, transport airplanes, plenty of fuel. They never heard back from them. So then the talk about aliens came up a lot. But this man's explanation, he says, it's not formal. The Navy doesn't acknowledge it, but everybody around in the Navy knows that that's what is happening, because 25 miles off the coast of Japan, every year, almost by the clock, the eruption comes from something way down at the bottom of the ocean, way the crust of the earth, and sends out magnetic signals, and it happens only for about 25 minutes, then it disappears. Well, of course, everybody knows that what took geography, the earth has crusts, where these crusts are working. And when they work and these plates move and come together, then you have earthquakes. Well, that is my story. Well, we survived. In fact, I survived, and the guy flying with me survived the Bermuda Triangle, and we got a pretty good explanation on what did it. But it happened to me, but there is some kind of electronic force that comes out and takes away all your instruments, your radio equipment, everything. Well, join us again in another session of the Pilot's Lounge.